Is it normal that my boyfriend threatened to unalive me and himself if I try to leave him? Disclaimers are not my story time. I sent me on Instagram. My boyfriend and I have been together for 6 years. He's always been very judgmental of everything I do. The clothes I wear, if I wear makeup, if I don't wear makeup, if I'm friendly, if I'm too friendly. He just finds a way to make everything I do bad. He's always been very controlling and very jealous too. But in the past 3 years, things have gotten even worse. Exactly 3 years ago, he asked me to marry him and I told him that I just didn't think we were ready. So basically, I said no. He took this as me saying that I didn't want to be with him, that I didn't love him, and that he wasn't good enough for me. Obviously, I don't think any of those things, but I said no because our relationship was not in a good place. I was always constantly scared of him and worried that he would get mad at me. I knew then that that was not a good situation to get married into. I can't imagine how much worse he would be if we actually got married and he felt like he owned me. After the proposal, he became more insecure and wanted to keep tabs on me all the time. Even if I'm going to my parents' house, he still calls me and checks on me if I'm still there. He's even called my mom to ask her where I am. Part 2 is up. Is it normal that my boyfriend threatened to unalive me and him if I ever tried to leave him? Disclaimer is not my story time. Sent me on Instagram. After the time where he called my mom and asked her where I was, my mom got really upset. She told him that he needed to give me space. And as you can imagine, him being already toxic, this made him extremely violent. By the way, at this point, we'd only been living together for 2 months. I came home to a broken TV. Our 75-inch plasma, he decided to throw on the floor. Then he told me that I needed to control my mother. And how dare she tell him how he needs to behave. Then he told me that he would never speak to my mother again. I mean, how does he think that this is going to make me any happier? I called my mom and told her that he had broken the TV and that he was extremely upset at her. My mom demanded that I leave him. But I know, it sounds so stupid. I still love him and I do feel bad for him. I know how much he depends on me emotionally. So when I got off the phone, I told him what my mom said. Then he flat out said, if you ever leave me, I will unalive you and then me. Then he punched a hole in a wall. So I went straight to my parents' house. Part 3 is up. Is it normal that my boyfriend threatened to unalive me and then himself if I ever left him? Disclaimer is not my story time. Sent me on Instagram. After I ran away to my parents' house, he sent me a message saying that he would give me some time. I thought this was a good sign. Maybe he was starting to understand what I needed. I stayed at my parents' house for a week, and that's when I started noticing that he was driving around my neighborhood. If I went to the supermarket, he was there. Eventually, I called him and we made up. He did try to work on his jealousy, which made a huge improvement in our relationship. The only problem is that anytime we would ever get into a fight and I would say that I needed space, he would come back to the same thing. Always say, I will unalive you and then me. He knows that by saying that I'm gonna instantly stop the fight, but I'm starting to think that he's not gonna do it. And I heard from a guy friend that his girlfriend says the same thing to him, so I'm just wondering if it's just him being dramatic. Because at this point, I'm only with him because of that. I feel bad for him. Part of me is still very attracted to him, but I know that he's just gonna continue getting worse. Is this normal or not? What should I do?
Storytime about my extremely creepy neighbors. So a little background information, I was 12 years old and I was in 6th grade, and my family and I lived in a really small town where everyone knew everyone. But our new neighbors had been building their house next to us for the past 4 years. And finally, when they were done with the house, this house was huge. I mean, probably because there were like 8 people moving into the house. There was the mom, the dad, 4 kids, and their grandparents. So like 8 people. But I was super excited because I was like, okay, this is awesome. I get to meet some new friends. But after 2 weeks of not seeing anybody playing in the backyard or anybody on the school bus, I started to think that their family was super weird. And everyone in our neighborhood liked to gossip, and everyone was saying how they barely see the people who had just moved in. So my mom decided to take one for the team and make some brownies, take them over to the house, and I ended up going with her. So we go up to the house, we knock on the door, and one of the kids came and opened the door, but the dad ran over and grabbed him, like for part 2. Part 2 about my extremely creepy neighbors. So like I said, my mom and I took some brownies over there, and one of the kids opened the door, and when he opened the door, he had a bunch of bruises all over his body. The dad came running over and ripped his son from the door and slammed the door in our faces, and all you could hear was him screaming at his son. So my mom and I went to walk away before the door opened, and he was like, sorry, my son knows better than to open the door to strangers. So he took the brownies, and then I asked him if I could have a sleepover with one of his daughters, and he was super hesitant at first, but he said that I could only have a sleepover with her if it was at my house and not theirs, which my mom was completely fine with anyways because she thought that it was a little bit weird that his son had bruises covering his whole body. So that night when she came over to sleep over my house, I asked her how her brother got all those bruises all over his body, and she said that he just fell down some stairs. But after that, we became best friends, and we would literally hang out like 5 times a week until the one day I knocked on their door to ask if she wanted to come over, and her dad answered the door and said that she was gone. Like for part 3. Part 3 about my super creepy neighbors. So like I said, I became best friends with their daughter, but the one day I went over her house to ask if she wanted to come over, and her dad answered the door and said that she was gone. And when I asked when she would be back, he was like, she went to go live with her mom, so probably never. which was super weird because she never mentioned that she had another mom. So fast forward 2 months, my family and I are sitting around the fire pit when we hear someone scream help. But we weren't sure if that's what we were actually hearing because it was so quiet, and then all of a sudden we heard someone banging on my neighbor's basement door. You know those metal doors that people usually have outside of their house that lead down basement steps? Yeah, well that's where the banging was coming from, so my dad hopped over the fence to see if that's where the screaming was coming from also. And then not even a minute later, my dad hopped back over the fence and it looked like he saw a ghost, but he ran inside, called 911. Because I was so young, the only thing my parents told me about that whole situation was that the girl that I was friends with was still alive and her parents were keeping her in the basement along with 2 of her other siblings. But then we also found out that they weren't even her real parents. They were kidnapped at the hospital when they were born.
My husband hit me for the first time and I'm still in shock. My 23 female, husband 26 male and I have been married since February 2020. We joked when it happened that we had the perfect timing since a lot of my friends ended up with relationship strife and breakups over the last couple of years. Currently, we have one daughter who is 7 months old. I stay home with her most of the time. My husband works in management for an up-and-coming company and is often gone 9 to 10 hours a day, so I do all of the housework. This is usually totally fine with me. This week, I did a lot of cooking and baking and haven't been as diligent as I should have been with dishes, so I let them build up in the sink quite a bit. My husband mentioned it yesterday morning when he was grabbing coffee, and I told him I plan on doing them in the afternoon. He grumbled a little but didn't argue. Then, yesterday afternoon, I ended up getting a surprise visit from one of my friends who brought her 2-year-old for a playdate. Our kids love each other and always have a lot of fun, so that's how the afternoon passed. My friend left at 4:30 or so, and I immediately started dinner and the dishes. My husband got home at 5:30. Dinner was just finishing up. Dishes were about 75% done. I rinsed my hands and left what was remaining in the sink, grabbing clean plates so we could eat. My husband said something to me like, "Couldn't even finish the dishes? What have you been doing all day?" Ooh, this is gonna get ugly. My husband and I like to tease each other good-naturedly, so I assumed this was more of the same. I said something like, "Dinner is ready and I like to eat it while it's hot for once in my life." My husband didn't say anything, but he did backhand me across the mouth and then he told me not to disrespect him again. I was in complete shock because he never acts this way. It was a complete 180 out of the blue. Even in arguments with men, I've never seen him threaten to raise a hand to them. I'm so confused and I'm scared to bring it up and I don't know what to do. How does a woman leave a man when she has no money, no income, no supportive family, and a kid? If not for our daughter, I think I would have told him to F off and walked out that exact moment. But my worst fear is her ending up homeless or worse, him getting full custody because I don't have a safe place to house her. My mom is my only living family and she's a barely functional alcoholic, so I'm not sure what she could do even if she wanted to. And then a part of me says that this is a huge overreaction and that my daughter would hate me for leaving her dad over one measly fight.